So, Morris, which pleasingly I've had a reasonable amount of time on this week. So we've been buttoning up quite a few things, and actually it's, I would say, pretty much ready to go testing in. If it wasn't for the fact that we've got about 3 inches of snow outside. That's always the way, isn't it? As soon as all the cars are ready to be taken out on the road, the weather turns bad. So I have been buttoning up all sorts of little things. We did the fillet on the front windscreen. I fitted the rear view mirror camera. So for those who haven't heard me talk about this before, it's using a Gentex FDM full display mirror. So the rear view mirror is actually an LCD screen, and there's a little camera in the rear window. Big plus of that is you don't see any of the interior in your rear view mirror, so it's just a completely uninterrupted view of the road. Obviously automatic dipping, automatic brightness control according to the sunlight, etc. Really good bit of kit. And then one of the extra bits of functionality is the reverse camera. So a while ago on the back of there we made a billet piece which holds the number plate light, but it also mounts the reverse camera. And when you put it in reverse, it brings up a little inset second picture on the screen, which is from the second camera, which gives you the immediate view right up to the back of the car, whereas the rear view mirror is a bit more distant. So that's actually something I was testing again this week, because we fitted the boot lid for the final time, and that was waiting for the hinges. So we've machined our own billet hinges for the boot. James has now fitted those, fitted the latches. There's gas struts on those hinges, which I think are actually E30 BMW bonnet gas struts. And then they mount into the rear bulkhead on some machined clevises, and that was the sort of that was the stopping point in me being able to do a final fit on the interior, because we needed to put the bolts in those which go behind the bulkhead panel. So we've done that. I did a bit more electrical tweaking, one of the things being to test the electric boot release, which now works absolutely spot on. Our hope was that from the remote you could blip the remote and the boot would come open, which it does perfectly. James has just been working on some bump stops for it. We're putting some rubber buffers in and just trying to get the right softness so it doesn't stop too abruptly when it comes up. But it kind of ties in with one of my sort of bugbears about a lot of modern cars, is the sort of unnecessary complication to solve relatively simple problems, and electric opening boots is one of them. There's this trend at the moment for motorised boots that sort of slowly and frustratingly open electrically. Yes, they close electrically, which can be mildly convenient, although normally when you're closing your boot, by that time you don't have anything in your hand, so it's not really a hardship to close the boot. But also, if you've ever done that sort of camping trip where you're trying to get a sleeping bag in there and you're just trying to slam the boot on it to get it all in, electric boot lids don't like that. And in terms of the opening, you can achieve exactly the same thing with a spring or a gas strut. So that's exactly what we've done on this. There's an electric solenoid to release it, and then a gas strut that opens it up from there. So that's another thing ticked off. And with those struts bolted in, we could then get the rear bulkhead upholstery panels in for the final time. That then meant I could get the carpets in. I'd sort of laid them out loosely already, but they needed gluing in place, so I've been going through gluing all the different carpet sections in. That then meant I could get the seats in for the final time, so they're in there. And then I've been buttoning up a few other little bits and bobs. There's a very small fuse box, although the car generally is running a PDM system, which is like a programmable ECU to control all the electrics on the car. There's a little fuse block for things that have a continuous power. So we have the PDM go into sleep mode when the ignition's turned off, so it's not a parasitic drain on the battery, but we've got a continuous feed to the interior light circuit, the central locking circuit, the radio for the memory on it, which is just via a little fuse block. So I've been making a bracket for that. The same bracket has doubled up to hold a micro switch for the brake light switch on the brake pedal, which is one of the remaining jobs that needed ticking off. So I've got that lot finished up under there. And then the machined bezel for the radio, I've been meaning to get around to fitting that, which I've now done. That looks really neat now, it's all properly in place. It's kind of been hanging half in there for quite a while. And yeah, so it's basically buttoned up in there now. And then the other thing which I've been meaning to get around to for a while was fitting the grille. So today actually I've been just trial fitting that. In fact, I'll just sneak down here. I've been doing a trial fit of the grille. We had the surround made a while ago, which is just a water jet cut profile in aluminium, which we've had black anodised. And then we've got little bonded pads that have got studs welded to them on the corners, which go into some brackets that we put in the shell at the metalwork stage. And then I've just bonded in a sort of hex plastic mesh to it. And then I was able to fit the ducts in here, which you can hardly see actually now they're in, but we did 3D printed ducts that sit in here and make use of this space. And they're actually brake cooling ducts, so there's a round spigot on the back of those, with a duct that will go to the brake calipers. Got the spotlights in for the final time, so for the first time you're actually able to see the front end how we imagined it to be in its final guise, and I'm really happy with it. So I think I've just got to button up a couple of bits of wiring for the spotlights now they're in for the last time, stick the wipers on, and James, well at that point I can test drive it as soon as the weather's good. James is just working on the boot upholstery panels, and then they'll go away for upholstery, and that really is the last piece of the puzzle. The Morris is over the pit. We're doing final spanner check sheet on this at the minute. So with all the vehicles we build towards the end, or at the end basically, we've got a check sheet where we go through with a specific list of all safety critical fasteners on the car, where they're checked off, paint marked with a colour coded scheme, double checked by a second person and photographed with the paint marks on. So we're just going through that at the minute. We haven't pushed ridiculously urgently with that over the course of the last week, because the weather has been absolutely revolting for the last week, so the chances of me getting out in it to test it have been pretty slim anyway. And then James has been working on the boot panelling, so he's now finished the side panels. They're ABS plastic panels, I think they're 3mm thick. We actually put the upper mountings for these in at the metalwork stage, so it was basically just templating and making those panels. He's formed some sheet steel trim panels down here. That material just suited forming some curves on them quite easily, which form a cover for the solenoid for the boot release. And then I think he's done, but it's not in at the minute, he's done the pattern for the bulkhead board, which will go onto those mounts at the top there, that we put them in at the metalwork stage to basically form the finishing panel there in front of the fuel tank. That'll have a light mounted in it for the boot light. Yeah, other than that, once we've finished that, it's upholstering those panels, carpet in, and then we're good to go. The spare wheel goes in there, which we've had for ages, and that lashes down to some points that are built into the shell there. And that's going to be the final step, really, on that. The other thing he's done is the bump stops on this. I think I talked about the fact that this released nicely off the remote fob and off a button inside last week, but it was a little bit, because the gas struts need to be reasonably firm when they go past this sort of initial point here, but then they almost have more force on them when it gets towards the top. And the bump stops we had were a little bit vicious. It felt a bit scary letting it just come all the way up, so we've got some much softer bump stops on it now, so you're confident for that to just come up under its own power. Anyway, Morris. So earlier today I drove this for the first time, so driven probably 2 miles in it now, down to our local MOT centre and back, and it's always really nerve-wracking driving a car, a build like this, when there's so much custom stuff on it. There's so many things that can not be right, you know, just from suspension noise, overall noise, vibration, harshness issues, leaks, wiring. There's so many things, potential pitfalls, and there's always some where they could be extremely difficult to solve. So it's very nerve-wracking doing the first drive, but I have to happily report it was probably one of the best first drives I've done. So suspension feels absolutely spot on. I probably just need to soften the rear dampers slightly, but the precision feel of it, the steering feel, it's like an MX-5, only even more so, which is fantastic. The engine felt great, gearbox felt great, clutch feels great, brakes are good, temperatures and pressures were all good, so far leak free. Yeah, couldn't really ask for a lot better, to be honest. there's always some little tiny bits and bobs, but I'm trying to think what they even were. I mean, so far I noticed we'd lost a bit of fluid out of the power steering cap, but we then realised we'd forgotten to fit the little filters. We designed these caps with like a pinhole, and then they've got like a sintered filter inside, and we actually forgot to fit the filters. So I suspect that might well solve the problem there. What else was there? Really not a lot, actually. I'm struggling to even think of anything that I've noticed. So really it's just, I've got various little detail jobs left to do on it. Things like handbrake gaiter, gear stick gaiter, general tweaking and tidying jobs, and then it's just getting more miles on it really now, and just going through that process of going from the initial nerve-wracking, oh God, is it going to fundamentally feel okay, to getting more comfortable in the car and gradually being able to focus more on the details. But certainly, even from a sort of knocks and rattles point of view, there was nothing, no squeaks, knocks and rattles. The refinement felt great. So it's a very good starting point, and hopefully we'll, as we test this over the coming weeks, we'll get some in-car footage. James has now finished his boot panelling work, so that will be going off to Dean to be upholstered. He did one of the job this week, was these wheels, I don't think they've ever been shown fitted yet, but they've got a centre cap with basically a sort of mock-up centre lock nut on them. And I fitted those caps for the first time the other day, and I wasn't entirely happy with the look of them. I thought the nut looked too chunky, so James has turned down those nuts and the spigot that they thread onto. And it's totally transformed the look of them, so I'm really happy with those. But we're just going to make up some little machine centre caps to go in now that we'll laser a logo into. So that'll be the finishing touch on the wheels. And then, as you can see, the masking tape's there to stone chip protect, but one of the things that will be on the cards is doing PPF protection over the rear arches so we don't get stone chips on the rear. Yeah, so it's basically details, getting some more miles on it. Watch this space. James in the background here is just finishing off the tail end of the Morris boot trim panelling. We've got the lamp that we were using on that now for the boot illumination, so it's just doing the holes for that, and then that lot can go away for leather after that. It's sod's law, we've had some nice days in terms of weather this week, and then I've been too busy to get out in it, so we're trying to get the stars to align and have a decent weather day when I've actually got the time to set aside to get some miles on it, but that's really the next step on that. Right, let's have a little wander over here. If you go to that side, Jamie. I'm going to stay here for the minute. Morris, James was working on a few things, just buttoning up the boot. The trim panels went away to Dean, I think last week it was, to do the leather work on those, and he's also doing a leather pad to go on the inside of here as well. And then, sort of tied in with all of that, James was making a bracket for a micro switch, which goes on one of the boot hinges to turn a boot light on when the boot's open, do the wiring to the light itself, finish off the wiring that goes into the boot lid for the number plate light, and just generally button up all the remaining bits of wiring and work in the boot there. So Dean's actually cracked on really fast with that. The trim panels for there, they're done, will be dropped off with me this week. So we should be able to button that up actually. I feel like I've used button up a lot this episode. We'll be able to get all those trim panels in. He's done the carpet as well, so carpet will be in, that'll finish off the boot. Yeah, finish that job off. Morris is probably the remaining one. A lot of the cars have been covered up to stop dust getting from the construction, so I've got no visual clues here. But the Morris, I went out in that this week, another test drive session. That kind of gave me a few little tweaks I wanted to do. Nothing major. We lost power steering, and we had a problem with the power steering before, and it's all come down to the pressure relief valve in the pump sticking. Now it was a remanufactured new remanufactured pump. We still had problems with the pressure relief valve sticking, but I think we've solved them now. So that was the first thing I wanted to get out of the way before taking it out and getting a few more miles on it. But so far, very promising. And I also got on to finishing off the boot trim installation. So last week, Dean delivered the upholstered boot panels back. I've been getting those installed, getting the carpet in the boot. James, I think last week, finished off his micro switch installation for the boot light. And so we've got all that together now, spare wheel in there, that's all done. So yeah, further road testing on that, and we'll see where we get to with it. behind that, we've got the Morris. I've been out doing some testing again today. We've got a couple of little gremlins to try and sort. I think I mentioned before we had problems with the power steering. The pressure relief valve in the pump itself keeps sticking open, so it's bypassing all the fluid and taking your power assistance away. And I suspect there must be some kind of debris, because every time we take it out, it's completely free. We've MRE'd it, checked everything's clean. You can pull the thing in and out with a magnet, no problem. And then the next time we do it, it's stuck so tight you have to pull it out with pliers. So I think what we need to do is introduce a small filter into the power steering circuit. There must have been some debris got in there somehow. Maybe it was in the reconditioned pump, but it's very difficult now. It's a fully filled system to identify where that's got to and get it out. And it'll only be very tiny particles. So we're going to introduce a filter in that so that strains out any particles as it circulates. And I've got a clutch slip issue, which is actually very similar to what we had on Utah when we were first testing that, whereby it's absolutely fine to start with, but then after you've done a certain number of clutch actuations, it starts to feel like the clutch is being held slightly depressed, so it's only slightly engaged, or so it means as soon as you get load on it, it starts to slip. And it definitely seems as though it has to be an issue with the fluid returning to the master cylinder. So the more and more you use it, the more it slightly pumps the clutch up, and then if you leave it overnight, it's back to normal again, which is exactly the problem we had on Utah, and that turned out to actually be a manufacturing defect in the master cylinder, meaning that the push rod wasn't going all the way back. It was going and leaving maybe like the tiniest opening that you could, over a long period of time, fluid would gradually go through. But in normal use, it wasn't returning properly, and so it was gradually jacking the clutch more disengaged. So I suspect we've got something similar on this, so I'm going to start investigating that. Let's have a little wander over here. In fact, Jamie, if you want to overtake me. Morris, I'm working through fault finding, the things we talked about last week. So the clutch, still a bit of a mysterious one. I was expecting to find that the slave cylinder was pressurising up and not letting fluid get back to the master. So my theory was if we'd get it on here, pump the clutch a load of times, if we crack the bleed nipple with the clutch released, I'd still see pressure there, and you get a sudden jet of fluid coming out at the bleed on the slave. But that wasn't the case. So it wasn't an immediate tick, yes, that's definitely it. I'm still reasonably convinced it is something to do with the master cylinder though. So what I did on this occasion was blow air, sort of low pressured air, back up from the slave back to the reservoir via the master, just to make sure there's not any debris got caught in the master cylinder drillings. And then dropped all the fluid out and refilled it, and I'm going to take it for another drive in that state and see what happens there. And I'm still not sure whether it corresponds to it being warm or the number of times you press the clutch. So the next time we go out, I'm going to bring it back on the pit when it's hot and do the sort of pumping the clutch a lot and seeing if there's any pressure built up in there to see if it maybe relates to it being hot. But so we're essentially in process with that. And then I've now got the filter here that I'm going to use on the power steering feed. So I'm literally in the middle of the job of sucking the power steering fluid back out of it to just take the pressure relief valve, clean that up, and then we'll remake the feed pipe to have that filter on it, and then we'll be out for the next series of test drives then.